we're still able to somehow continue working on our books and writing software. And I guess when you just love right. Oh, hold on a second.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, when you love what you do and when you love coding and teaching people, you just make it all work somehow.
I suppose there are a lot of people who are probably interested in knowing, like curious about what you do and so on. But today, I think I just want to bring the focus back to some of your work, your Python and Django books, and also because this is PyCon, it will also be on your tech community work. So first question I have is, how do you, what got you interested in writing Python and Django books? Like, was it because there isn't any that you found in the bookshelves that is simple to understand, or you just found that, or it's just an expression of your deep interest in a topic? Like, what got you started to writing a book and became a series? Yeah.
So that's a great question, Chi, and I want to just show you with the green screen, you can kind of see through the book, but this was really the previous edition of Two Scoops of Django. Wait, let me. Okay, so it's a pretty thick book. When the story of how we got started writing this in late 2012, it started out as a very small book. It was about this big, and it started out as back then. My husband and I were working on a lot of different Django projects. We were doing consulting, we were doing open source, and one thing we found about working this way was that a lot of the knowledge that we had about Django came from working on different projects from different companies and working with different engineers. You would share these tricks of how to do things, and often there was Django snippets, an old snippet site for Django, but often these tricks would be you'd have to kind of talk to someone to understand, or it wouldn't just be a snippet. You'd have to understand how to for example, how to separate your settings into multiple settings files. What are the best practices for that? What does everyone do to how does everybody organize their Django projects? And those sorts of things, they would be very opinion based, and so it was hard to find that kind of information in the Django documentation. The Django documentation tries to be as neutral as possible, and they try to avoid making people use specific patterns that are opinionated. So with this knowledge just being passed on word of mouth, developer to developer, we realized that there are all these developers who just would have no access to the knowledge that we got from working on these different projects. And so the book started out with us, Two Scoops of Django started out with us trying to write all of that down, and it just kind of grew and grew, and it went from being that tiny little book to being all this. And most of this wasn't even Python and Django tips that we came up with. Most of this was community contributions, people telling us, people filing issues in our GitHub issue tracker, or just saying, hey, you should also mention this, or this is wrong, I do it this way.
So this is really practical books from real life examples, and it's not just theory. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the book became like an unofficial best practices for Django. I suppose. Is there something that, just one thing you could mention? And probably you already have mentioned a lot of. You mentioned a lot of people gave you the ideas to to put in the book. But is there one thing that you wanted people to know or discover about Django through that 2 Scoops of Django book? Something that most people don't get. Is there something like that, or there's just too many?
That's a good question. Let me think. I mean, I guess one of what I would really want people to know is that a lot of developers who are new to Django, they they get really stressed out when they're first setting up their project, that they feel like one of the biggest questions we get over and over is hey, did I set up my Django apps properly? That you have all these different Django models that that use the Django ORM and that connect to your database. And the question is are these models divided up into the correct number of apps? Like should I have 3 apps, or should I have 50 tiny apps, or how should I divide it? And the big thing that I want to that we always advise, my husband and I, who my co-author, advise people is that you shouldn't stress too much about it. Just kind of draw it out on a board, diagram it out, put your models. Wait, hold on a second. Okay. Diagram out what Django models you want to have, and split them up into apps, and just kind of do it pretty evenly, but don't stress, because if you set it up and you don't like the way it is, you can iterate. That it's always fine to iterate. It's always, you can, if it shouldn't, if it's that early on in a project and you try it out and you don't like it, you can even just create a new second project and move things around the way you want. That
so there's no perfect way of starting.
Exactly. That you don't have to get your you don't have to architect things perfectly from the beginning. You can iterate, and as long as you remain flexible and you're willing to write something that you're going to improve upon, and then you're able to actually be disciplined enough to improve upon it when it starts to bother you, then that approach is fine.
Well, thank you. That's a very good advice. What's your thought process like writing the book, though? You may already have answered the question earlier that you said as you go along consulting the engineers, and then you find something that's really useful, you put in there. So how is that what you do? Like, or you actually thought through, like, okay, these are the topics, where to begin? Does it have to flow like a story? Like, you start off as, of course, you have to set it up, and then what you get in the middle, and then what were you thinking about when you write the book?
Yeah, so with 2 Scoops of Django, with this book, the main book that we're known for, it's my thought process is typically, as I'm working on a Django project, I will realize that this is this pattern that's sort of forming itself in this project is something that other people should know about. And when I start to realize that for something that I'm working on, I take some notes, and those notes go into the book, and it sort of evolves organically as Daniel and I are working on different Django projects, that the book just it just grows, or things change.
The good thing is both of you are in the industry, and you are like on the ground, so you know how it flows. Whereas I suppose people who are
and then our other book, the new one that's actually just it's in beta right now. It was originally called Django Crash Course. Now we're rebranding it as a wedge of Django. That book is a Django tutorial book, and that one has evolved out of us doing corporate trainings that we used to travel around before the pandemic, and we used to go on site with different organizations and do these week-long trainings. And as we were doing those, we had a huge slide deck, and we had a bunch of notes on that, and that sort of evolved into this book, a wedge of Django.
Wow, it's really cool. We should check it out later after this. So what about children's book? Like, why do you start writing a series of fantasy fiction, and there's also another children book?
So with the fantasy fiction, my husband and I, we are I guess we are very imaginative people, and the fantasy fiction started out as a book that Danny was writing, actually like Two Scoops of Django, a book that Danny was writing, and then I started reading it and started editing it, and then ended up starting to write parts of the story. And it's funny because the same thing happened with Two Scoops of Django, that he was back before it was even that big, when it was really tiny. It was something it was like an angry rant about best practices that me coming over and helping. But getting back to the fiction and the children's books, it's just been a really fun thing to do on the side, and it's also been a way that we can use Python as a tool in our workflow. Like in our fiction books, we use Python as a tool to generate the books. In the case of the Ambria Fantasy series, we wrote some Python scripts that pull all the fiction chapters out of Google Docs, and they come in as Markdown, and they get assembled into the PDF and EPUB file for Kindle. And then with the children's books, I've always liked to draw and illustrate, and it just I don't know, it just came out. Sometimes you have
I get what you mean. It's good that you mentioned that, because you do struck me as a person who would do things just for fun, and you apply fun to your work, which is very rare in engineers, actually, because you do it for a purpose usually. So just purely judging from your book covers as well, the illustrations that you have, the 2 scoops of ice cream and so on. So can you share a little bit more on how did you get to be so creative? Like, well, you are in a very technical, you graduate from a very technical degree, but on the other side, you also, like you mentioned, like the design, illustrate, and so on. So does working for yourself helps for you to sort out like a full control of your time, hence you have time to be more creative, or have you always been very creative that way?
So I think that I like to think of the coding and the art as kind of equally creative, that they're creative in different ways, and they use different parts of the brain. So sometimes I guess I started drawing in my senior year of college. So around 2004, 2005, I was learning Adobe Illustrator, and I as my way of learning, I would draw a little drawing every day or every week, and it you know it was sort of this weekly project type of way of learning by doing that I followed. At the same time, I was doing a similar thing with learning Linux. So I was installing a new Linux distro every week on my old desktop computer just to see what would happen, and so it would use different parts of the brain, but it was just kind of a fun thing to do, and I feel like it reflects why I got into programming and into Python. That it was that I've always been a maker and a builder and someone who just who likes to create things. So so my favorite thing about programming is what I can create. That I think there is elegance to the program itself, but what really excites me is the ability to build amazing things with it as a tool.
So what are some of the projects that you're working on currently?
So so the big thing that my husband and I are working on right now is the new book, A Wedge of Django, which is in beta and is going to come out any day now. And so we've been working on not just the book itself, but the book pipeline for building it, that behind the scenes that uses book down, and it's got Python scripts to pull different code snippets and run tests. And then we also another project that I'm working on is a Django project that's a document management system, and that's something that I've been working on with a company for many years on and off, and that's what keeps my Django skills sharp these days.
Well, it's a good segue for us to go into the tech community questions right now.
Sure.
How did you get started with open source projects? What would you recommend for people to begin with? Because in Women in Code KL community, we are also trying to get people into open source, especially those who are not very confident with their coding skills per se. And then the Hacktoberfesting is around the corner. So what would you recommend?
So with open source, I got into open source. I mean, I played around in college. I always wanted to contribute, but I only first released my own open source, I think around 2008 or so. And that was just a little, it was a little project that I had done at a hackathon. It was a little JavaScript project where you were, you had these different windows that you were syncing from browser to browser. And I wrote it, and then I didn't know what to do with it at the end of the hackathon. I had this code, and I had talked to some people at the hackathon who seemed interested in seeing the code. So I put it up on GitHub, and I figured, hey, why not? Probably nobody is going to look at it, and but at least I can share it with the people who wanted to see it. And you know, I didn't know at the time that was what would lead me to doing a lot more open source. Where I really got serious about open source was around, I'd say around 2012, 2013. I decided, so GitHub has that streak feature where you can see your little green boxes every time you do a commit. And I thought, and I there was a list back then of all the top, it was like a leaderboard for who's committed the most. and I just went through the names one by one, and I noticed that all these the top 20 people on the list, they all so they were the ones who had committed every day, and without cheating. Like the ones that were cheating, I ignored it. But the ones who really committed all had projects that had 100 stars or more, and that triggered in my brain that, oh, if I want to start a real project of my own, I might not know how to get it to 100 stars, but if I just commit every day, and if I just put something in there, then by the time, if I don't stop, then maybe I'll get up there to the top 20 of people who that was the list of people who have committed for the longest streaks, not necessarily the most popular or anything, just the idea that is being that by keeping up a long streak, you naturally build something of value. And so and I found that was a lot better of an approach for myself in terms of contributing to open source meaningfully. That sometimes that most newcomers to open source will think, oh, I should submit a pull request to Django or to CPython or to Flask, to one of the big projects, and then they submit a pull request, and they're waiting and and hoping it'll go in, and usually the maintainers are all volunteers and they're busy and they just don't have time, and then the newcomer gets discouraged, and there's no reason to be discouraged and to feel like you have to get your tiny bit of code into a big project when Python has amazing mechanisms for packaging. So all you have to do is find a template for a Python package, stick your code in, and publish it to the Python package index, and boom, you've contributed to open source. You could do it in a night. It's a lot easier to create a package from scratch, or even doesn't have to be a package, a script. It's a lot easier to create that open source repo and put it out there than it is to try to get something into a big project.
Well, yeah, this is definitely a very good. I have not heard of this suggestion before. Could bring this up to the team to encourage people to start their open source journey. I also found that you founded PyLadies. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did that come about?
So I was one of 7 women who started PyLadies in Los Angeles in 2011, and the story was that I went to PyCon, and at PyCon I met this amazing Python developer, Anna Ravenscroft Martelli, who was very involved with the Python Software Foundation. And I was kind of shy. I felt like I was nobody, and we were talking about how excited, I was so excited to meet other women at PyCon, because at the time it was still, before PyLadies, and before the whole, before Women Who Code, before this whole movement of hey, let's all support each other as women programmers. It was very hard to meet other women programmers back then. And so I was talking to Anna at PyCon and saying, about this, and she said, she told me, she pointed at me and said, Audrey, you can do something about this. You can change this. and and I was kind of shocked. And she said, write up a proposal to the Python Software Foundation about something you can do in Los Angeles to get more women into Python. Come up with it, write it up, and the Python Software Foundation is so nice. The members, the board members, they want to see more women getting into Python, she told me, but they just don't know how to do it. So write something up and get submit a grant application. And so I went back to LA, and I didn't know what to do, because I felt like I'm just one person, and at the time I really didn't know any other women in Python. And so I went to our local Python meetup, SoCal Piggies, it was called at the time, SoCal Python Interest Group, and there was one other woman there, and so I told her about this, and I was telling the other men about this too, and saying, hey, let's do something to get more women into this Python user group, that it will be more comfortable if if I have other women to relate to, and maybe more women will come. And so we decided to teach a class for women patterned after classes that they had in Boston for getting women into Python. And there were similar classes in San Francisco for Ruby on Rails at the time too. And then what happened was, after that SoCal Python meetup, several of the members messaged me and said, hey, I know this woman at work who might be interested in helping out with your workshop. And so I got a few people, I met a few more women. I didn't even meet everybody in person, but we started this list, and every time someone referred a woman, someone who does a woman Pythonista who could help with the workshop, I asked them, hey, do you want to not just help out with the workshop, but do you want to be co-founder and co-organizer of this thing with me? And so then we all ended up being very invested in it. I'm sure those of you who are listening who are organizers of Python meetups or Python conferences will relate to this very well, because you all get very invested if you're on the organizing team, and it's always a team effort with these things, that nobody can do it alone.
Yeah. This is exactly what we did as well. There's no way you can do it on your own. Getting more and more people into the team becomes more like a community. Like, sometimes I find it so strange that it's a community being run by just one person. So what does PyCon community means to you? I spoke to a few people before the pandemic, when we can have physical meeting, and they all seem to have their own, especially PyCon community. I realize people are more, I don't know, there's this sense of like belong to the Python community. There's something very different about it. Like, what does it mean to you? I mean, of course, you met your husband there in PyCon. So besides that, or you want to share about that as well?
So it's, my first PyCon was PyCon 2010, where I ended up meeting my husband. But even before then, I I remember before I went to PyCon, I didn't, I thought of Python as this tool that is kind of fun to use, but I wasn't really involved with the Python community. I had been involved with with the mobile developer community, with just general programmer communities, but PyCon was the first place where I went to PyCon, and I remember that I I was so starstruck with meeting all my Python heroes, all these people who, like, I met I met people who worked on the Python imaging library, and my heart was just, and I met Ian Bicking, who created Virtual Env, and I almost fainted, and it was just but meeting these people and then feeling like they're not just these stars, but but during the sprints they wanted me to, people wanted me to come and join their projects and help them, and even if it was just just writing themes for Pinax was what I sprinted on at PyCon 2010. Just people are so welcoming, and I actually I don't know how many of you have been to a PyCon that has in-person sprints on open source projects, but it's so it's just so amazing to be able to contribute and to meet some of these developers that you admire who turn out to be just like you, and that's, to me, that's kind of what this feeling of community and Python community is, that you have, that you might admire people, but they also are so welcoming to you as a beginner, and then you learn and grow, and now I'm at the position where as someone who's been in the Python community a long time, it's my turn to give back, and like how it's your turn, how you're speaking and organizing.
Do you still get starstruck these days?
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw Guido van Rossum at I don't know, PyCon. The last time I went to PyCon US, I sat at the same table with him, and I felt, I think, I don't remember what I said. I said something really stupid, and then and then I felt so embarrassed, and I think I asked him, did you expect Python to did you expect your programming language Python to get so big and have this big PyCon? And he said something interesting. He said it depends on when you ask me. That if you asked me a few days ago, then yes, I did expect PyCon to be this big.
It's pretty funny then. Oh, sorry. I have like a last few questions before we wrap up. What else do you aspire to do? Is there like a roadmap or like a big project for yourself that you want to do?
Well, that's a hard question. I guess the biggest thing that I mean, in the past I've been very ambitious about, wanting to have this, wanting to create a lot of different packages and have big open source projects and all of this. And I feel like I've gotten past some of that, and I'm at a stage in my life where I just want to have fun with whatever I'm building and making, and I don't actually know what I'm going to be, what my next project is going to be. That right now, besides some of the Django work I'm doing in the books, I guess I don't I don't really know what I'm going to work on next, other than that it's going to be something that I have fun with. So I've been gardening a bit during the pandemic, and maybe something with gardening and Python. I don't know.
You don't have to grow seeds anymore. You just grow from your program. All right. I think that's all the time that we have left. But before we go, what's the best way for people to who wants to get in touch with you and your work? How do they reach out to you?
Go to feldroy.com, my last name, Feldroy, and from there you will find a link to my blog, email, website, the books, everything. Feldroy.com.
Thank you so much, Audrey. It's really, really an honor for me to be able to talk to you for just this 40 minutes. Yeah. So
likewise,
I hope
we really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Hey guys, I'm Malya, president of Theos India Foundation. And our entire team in Theos India and Tizi APEC in Asia Pacific are really looking forward to what kind of projects you build using Theos Python SDKs. Thank you guys.